Barbara, another story we want to ask you about. In an excerpt from The Atlantic of Jonathan Karl's upcoming book, Betrayal, former Attorney General Bill Barr gives an inside look at his break with President Trump over false claims of election fraud. Karl writes, Barr looked into allegations that voting machines across the country were rigged to switch Trump votes to Biden votes. We realized from the beginning it was just BS, Barr told me, noting that even if the machines somehow changed the count, it would show up when they were recounted by hand.
We realized from the beginning it was just BS,
from the beginning,
says Barr.
It's a counting machine, and they save everything that was counted. So you just reconcile the two. There had been no discrepancy reported anywhere, and I'm still not aware of any discrepancy. Barr also recounted telling an Associated Press reporter that there was no election fraud and promptly being asked to verify it by then-President Trump, which he did. The former president asked, "How the F could you do this to me? Why did you say it?" "Because it's true," Barr answered. The president, livid, responded by referring to himself in the third person. "You must hate Trump." Oh, my God. I know it's hard. In a lengthy statement released late Sunday, the former president called Barr a rhino who, quote, really let down the American people and, quote, was a disappointment in every sense of the word. Barb McQuaid, your thoughts on this and how potentially all of this kind of build up to the big lie could have been put to bed a lot earlier.
Yeah, that report also talks about how Mitch McConnell was urging William Barr to come out and make these public statements, not to save the country, but to save the GOP. Remember, this was during the time when the Georgia Senate race was still up in the air, and Mitch McConnell very much wanted Donald Trump down there campaigning for the Republican candidates, but he was too busy focused on trying to reverse his own election. And so before we deify William Barr for being such a great guy, I mean, I think it is good that he did not further abuse the Justice Department to advance Donald Trump's political agenda. Keep in mind one thing he did do. In the week after the election, he reversed a Justice Department policy that said we are not to investigate election fraud claims before votes are certified. And the reason is that is not the job of the Justice Department. We have secretaries of state around the country whose job is to do what you just said, Mika, to do hand counts and recounts and certify the election results. It is the job of the Justice Department to investigate crimes, and those can be done after the fact. And so changing that policy, I think, was further advancing Donald Trump's agenda in those early days after the election.
And Jonathan Lemire, we see yet another cabinet official, and we saw it happening in real time, somebody who compromised their integrity, bent over backwards to help Donald Trump, violated, certainly in my view and the view of many other conservative legal scholars, really breached constitutional norms, putting Donald Trump's interests over the interests of this country, over Madisonian democracy. But still, that not being enough in the end, when he refused to help the president try to overturn a presidential election.
First of all, Joe, this story uses a terrific moment of using the third person, which I think I'm going to start doing more of. You must hate Lemire, perhaps.
Exactly.
No, but
Lemire doesn't like what the Yankees are doing.
Lemire does not like that at all when they start hitting later this year. But no, you're right, Joe, that I think there are a couple things at play here. First of all, a little bit of reputation laundering, obviously, by the former Attorney General, putting this out in this new book that's coming out later this year. But I also think that it goes to show the system held, but just barely. And I think that is one of the biggest lessons coming from what we saw in the 2020 election, with Trump with a full-out assault on our democratic process, on the integrity of the ballot, on how elections are conducted and certified in this nation. And it didn't just culminate, of course, in the riot at the Capitol on January 6th, but all these other maneuvers behind the scenes. And we still are learning. Now, months later, we're still learning about some of the things that then President Trump tried to do, and those closest to him, like Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, House tried to do in sort of pushing these completely nonsensical allegations of voter fraud. And Attorney General Barr, no doubt, throughout most of his tenure, did what the president wanted him to do. From his first moments in the job, basically, whitewashing the Robert Mueller's findings to spin that in the most positive way for Donald Trump. He held here. He wouldn't go through this final request from the president. The system did do what it was supposed to at the end, but it shows how close we are and how dangerous it could be if something like this were to happen again in a future election.
All right, and finally, Barbara, tell us about your new piece for MSNBC entitled Michigan GOP Shoot Down Trump's Big Election Lie, Sort of. What do you mean by sort of?
Well, in Michigan last week, a report came out. It was conducted by a majority Republican Senate committee that investigated all of these baseless claims in Michigan about election fraud, about ballots being dumped at the convention center in Detroit, and about machines miscounting and dead people voting. And it debunked all of them. It found that there was no evidence whatsoever. In fact, it went so far as to recommend that our state attorney general look into prosecuting some of those people who've been making some of those baseless claims. So you would think that would mean end of story of any changes to voting laws in Michigan, wouldn't you? But just the opposite is occurring. Despite knowing that this is all a pretext, Republicans in Michigan are continuing to persist in changing the law in similar ways that we've seen in Georgia and Florida and other states to make it harder to vote under the guise of protecting voter integrity. Pretext is no way to run policy in a government. And so one would hope that now that these theories have been debunked, we would stop erecting barriers to voting. But nonetheless, they're persisting, and one has to ask the reason why. Perhaps it's because there are certain people that Republicans don't want to be able to vote.